What is your can't eat at everybody's house horror story? I was babysitting a kid in a pretty dirty house. I was told to wake him up, supervise bathing and changing clothes, and feed him. I was welcome to whatever was in the fridge. Okay, the house and his clothes were filthy. Then, when I opened the cabinets, floods of roaches poured out. There were roaches in every open box and container. I took him back to my house and returned him later that day. I hope the boy ended up in a better situation. I found out CPS got involved shortly after. Well, at least the parents or guardians of this child had the decency to hire or book a babysitter and didn't just leave the kid at home in that disgusting hole. But yeah, no, I agree. No kid deserves that. Story 2. Told my dad my sandwich tasted like fly spray at my grandma's house. He didn't believe me. 2 days later, I catch my grandma spraying the benches clean with the $2 fly spray you find at the cheap store. Dad figured it was safe to make sandwiches straight on the countertop because they looked clean. I dragged him over to see, and he apologizes and took my sister and I for fish and chips for lunch. Story 3. There was one time I was eating at my BF's house at the time, and his grandmother was cooking food. She wasn't feeling well, and everyone offered to cook that night, but she insisted. Usually when she's cooking, she doesn't like anyone in the kitchen. Thing is, the kitchen is the first thing you see when you walk into the apartment. So I came from the store to help pick up a few things for dinner. I walked in, saw her blowing her nose with her hand, and then used the same hand to massage seasonings into the chicken. She cooked the chicken in the rice. I didn't eat that day and just said I ate before I came over. Some of his family members thought I was rude, but I didn't have the heart to tell them since they also didn't like me very much because I was shy. Story 4. My mom thought that the turkey would dry out if you cooked it for the recommended time. We even used the turkeys with the popping thermometers in them, and never once did I see it pop. As a kid, I just thought it was a turkey button. Then she would eat the outside of the turkey that was cooked because she, quote, liked the white meat and skin. Like, ma'am, there would be a lot more white meat and less pink meat if you cooked it longer. Sibs and I always got sick after Thanksgiving, and she'd tell us it was because we were fat and ate too much. Wasn't until I moved away for college that I found out turkey wasn't supposed to be pink. I honestly thought I was just allergic to turkey. Story 5. When my gram made chicken soup, I raised my spoon for the first bite and noticed that the rice had character traits. I dropped my spoon, and my parents and sister were horrified why I reacted. I pointed to my bowl and told them that the grains of rice had legs and little eyes. My gram starts yelling that I'm being picky and a pain in the ass, etc. That's when my sister and my parents all noticed the same thing. We were all like, oh my god. But we were trying to be very gentle and laugh it off like, oh Graham, you must have accidentally picked up rice that you didn't realize this happened to. She has shelves in her garage where she keeps extra food like canned tomatoes, boxes of pasta, and rice. She swore up and down that she had just bought the rice, but all of us knew better. I felt awful that I ruined dinner. My mom stirred around the soup, took some out with the ladle, and sure enough, the entire batch was chock full of bugs. Listen, there's nothing rude or impolite about recognizing insects in your food and refusing to eat them. I don't think that that's out of line at all. That's just freaking gross. No one should do that. Story 6. Worked as a cleaning lady. There was one woman who had schizophrenia. She was kind, but damn, that house was the stuff you see on TV shows. They should send a team of professionals. She had a rat cage, and I've had pet rats myself, so I asked her about it. She said he had died. I took a closer look, and the water in the bottle had black spots all over it. The water had gone bad or something. I've never seen water go that bad in my entire life. The rat was gone, luckily, but the whole cage was still in there, like the rat had never left. Decided to do some dishes. They were piling up quite a bit, but she had no clean sponge or clean towels. She also didn't know where they were. There was a spot on the floor where 2 flies were feeding themselves off. As I vacuumed, they flew away. She asked me if I'd like some coffee, and just automatically I said yes before I realized what I had done. Right before she handed it to me, she said, I wonder when I last cleaned that thing. Must have been about 2 years ago. I said I forgot I had a cup of coffee at the previous house and shouldn't drink too much caffeine, and excused myself. Story 7. My grandma made me a food phobic from a young age. Whether it was ramen with moths floating on top or chunky milk in my cereal, it just scarred me for life. Dinner at her house was always a fight. Not eating her food was not an option. I'm not sure why that was the hill she would always choose to die on, because she was an amazing grandma other than this. Expiration dates aren't a thing. If the cheese is moldy, you cut it off. I think living through the Great Depression and raising kids in poverty changed her mindset on food. I mean, obviously she's doing something right because she's 91. She must have the immunity of a superhero. Story 8. I went to a friend's house after school. He was going to teach a group of us to play D&D. We got there and his house was disgusting. I'm not the neatest person, but the carpet hadn't been vacuumed in forever. Clothes were all over the place, and dirty dishes were stacked everywhere. He tried to be polite, even though the place reeked. But at some point, he was like, "Who wants snacks?" He picked up a bowl that was crusted with stuff, splashed in some water, wiped it with a towel that clearly hadn't been washed that decade, and poured chips into it. Then he asked if we wanted to stay for dinner. We did not. Story 7. We have a 73-year-old coworker who's a legit hoarder. I'll get to the point without going too far down this rabbit hole. Years ago, we had a potluck for our crew. As lunch is coming up, we're all getting cleaned up and putting all the food out. I go to the bathroom to clean up, and I see Ron walk out the stall as he's buttoning up his pants and walk right out. I go to our lunch area, and I see him in line, and first thing he does is grab a handful of chips and put it on his plate. I grab that bag and hand it to him. I tell him, "These are yours now." Long story short, I tell my boss why I did it, and he agreed. After that, I never participated in potlucks on the same crew as Ron. You know, you've got to watch people in the bathroom, public bathrooms. You really, really do. Not watch them go to the bathroom, but watch what they do afterwards, because so many people just stroll right out after fondling their junk and wiping their butt and don't wash their hands. And then they turn around and shake people's hands and touch things and grab food and stuff like that. I mean, it just really makes you think long and hard about what food you're actually, or like what you're putting in your body if you don't know exactly where it came from and who's been touching it, because people are nasty. You see it all the time. Wash your hands, people. Story 10. We have a chili contest every year at work around Thanksgiving, and I've stopped participating and voting for it because I want to know whose I'm eating before taking any. I work with some great people, but I wouldn't eat at or anything from their house. Strangely enough, the guy I absolutely despise, I'll gladly eat his chili because he's clean and well kept and I know his house is. I also work with a bunch of people who don't wash their hands after using the bathroom in any capacity, and we've secretly kept a list so to avoid any potlucks where they take food or to get food before they do. This literally echoes the sentiment that I gave to story number 9. You've got to know the people that you're interacting with if you're going to be sharing not just food, but like stuff in general, right? Office supplies, things of that nature. Ugh, it's just gross. Story 11. A girl I was interested in at the time had cats. I came to her house one day to pick her up for a date, and he had a large sack of rice open in her pantry with the pantry door open. One of the cats hopped out of the sack of rice, and she just casually laughed at it like, "Oh, they're always getting into things." Came over the following weekend, that same sack of rice was in the pantry, and I could hear one of them tussling around in it again. We stopped dating sometime after that, but anytime she offered to cook for me, I immediately pivoted to taking her out to eat instead. Story 12. I went with my then fiancé to visit some relatives of his. We arrived at their place to find that they were serving up the leftovers of this noodle dish, pancit, that had been there fair the night before. Now, if you know anything about handling pancit safely, you'd know that it goes rancid real quick in hot weather. I could smell that it had gone off, even from the doorway of the house. One of the older relatives knew this too, and bundled some of us to get McDonald's nearby. Those who insisted on eating the pancit got a bit sick later that day. Ugh, what a mess. Story 13. My own parents, or sisters, or any of my brother's houses. They're all the same. Dirty dishes in the sink with water backup, has dead flies in it, mold growing around everywhere, fly poop and mouse poop on everything. The food they cook isn't fit for human consumption, nor would I let the dogs or hogs eat it. The parents and sister took care of my grandparents for a while at my grandparents' house. That ended when I showed up unannounced and found mouse poop in all the cupboards, dirty dishes, and food spoilage in the fridge. I notified the right people and got the parents and bio-sister ousted. They brought in a new woman to cook and clean. My daughters and I did a military-grade field day on the grandparents' house. We scrubbed human poop, baby, from the ceilings and walls, vacuumed and steamed floors, annihilated the kitchen and bathroom with chemical warfare levels of bleach, tossed out a bunch of old and spoiled food, and hand-washed every dish in the house. to this day is something I want to kick my dad and mother's ass over. They were incompetent caregivers. The grandparents loved the new girl and the cleanliness she brought with her. Grandmother was a neat freak and always kept a clean, lived-in house. Grandfather tried his best. My own parents and siblings are slobs of their own making. Grandmother tried, and the cleanliness only stuck with me. Alright, so maybe the US Navy drove sanitation into my head as well. Story 14. I used to help an old neighbor out with grocery shopping. I'd drop the bags at her door, and she'd give me a check for the amount of groceries. She'd give me homemade cookies once in a while, chocolate chips. I didn't ever eat them because one time I caught sight of her apartment. It was a large studio, a small kitchen and TV and bed/couch, and about 20 cans of cat food, half eaten, and 1 million flies and small bugs in different stages of growth, dishes with crusty food stuck to them, and a wall of empty beer cans. After I saw that and got a whiff of her apartment, I started helping her with taking garbage out and putting groceries away, cleaning out her fridge and making sure her cat was healthy. A couple months later, she got COVID, ended up at rehab facility, and passed within 2 weeks. Some people need help and a little company. Story 15. My narcissistic mother would fake illnesses and not leave bed for months. There was also a portable toilet next to the bed. She hadn't showered in months and has highly questionable hygiene habits. Last Christmas, my now husband and I were visiting, and she said she made the meatballs. I brushed it off because she's highly delusional, and typically my dad cooked anyways. Turns out, my dad brought her the raw hamburger and supplies to make the meatballs in bed to make her feel better. She made the meatballs with her dirty hands next to the portable toilet. I found this out months later. We are now no contact for other reasons, but I'm thankful my husband and I will never risk eating her sketchy meatballs again. Story 16. My parents owned and rented a few mobile homes back when I was a kid. For many years, this older couple and their 2 boys lived with them. We would hang out after school. On the weekends, we were good buddies. But I could never have a sleepover at their house. For months I begged, and eventually my parents said yes. That night, we made microwave pancakes. We went to their bedroom with our food, and eventually I sat my plate down to go to the bathroom. When I returned, my plate was covered in cockroaches. Apparently, they had lived in multiple of my parents' trailers, and they had to spray and fumigate every time they left. My dad said that I just couldn't get the message and apparently had to learn the hard way. These people were very nice people, and my parents apparently helped them out whenever they could, hence the infestations in multiple units. Still today, I think about how many roaches probably crawled all over me that night. Bonus story. My grandpa was lifelong friends with this guy, grew up in the slums together. He always told me horror stories and would never go in his house. Well, my grandma used to babysit for this couple, and one day she, for whatever reason, had to drop the baby off at my grandpa's friend's house so his wife could help her out. When she came to pick the baby up, she said this: "They had a dog chained to a piano leg inside the house. It had ran a circle in the carpet and damn near pulled the leg off. There were ketchup stains on the ceiling where someone had smacked the bottle and it had shot ketchup out. Apparently, when she got there, the lady couldn't find the baby, and it had somehow gotten under a pile of clothes." Story 17. I had to stay at a friend's cousin's house for a few days. I wasn't allowed to stay in my own house due to abuse allegations, and she was nice enough to take me in. The thing is, the house was hoarder level. I slept on the floor, which was covered in clothes and a 3-inch layer of cat hair. I hope it was cat hair. She fed me macaroni and cheese, but I distinctly remember there being green crusts on the noodles and the fork being dirty. Not wanting to be rude, I picked out what noodles I could and claimed I wasn't hungry since I had to leave my home. The milk she offered me the next day was cottage cheese, and I politely phoned another friend to ask if I could sleep on their couch because I was finding bugs on my body. Story 18. Listen up, because I've got a story that'll make you swear off potlucks for life. Meet Carol. She's that office angel who brings cookies on Fridays and rescues the printer. We all love Carol. Carol decides to host a dinner party, and let's be honest, we're all expecting this to be the food equivalent of a TED Talk. Inspirational and enlightening. We get there, and Carol unveils the main dish, her world-famous tofu casserole. Now, I'm no food snob, but this thing looked like it had already been eaten and returned to the plate for round 2. Being the brave or stupid soul I am, I took a scoop. First bite, and it's like my mouth got ambushed by the ghost of expired vegetables and tofu that had given up on life. It's so bad, even the dog won't touch it. And this is a creature that eats its own vomit. But wait, it gets worse. I'm trying to power through when I hit something crunchy. I dig it out and find, no crap, a whole-ass acrylic fingernail, complete with chipped glittery nail polish, looking up at me like the Eye of Sauron. Yeah, I would throw up if I took a bite out of an acrylic nail. Story 19. This is a family story. It happened when I was a baby, so no memory. It was a family Thanksgiving, potluck style. Everyone brought one dish, plus a drink to share. One of my aunts by marriage brought mashed potatoes. She let it slip that while cooking she ran out of milk, so instead of having her husband run out to try and get more, she used her own breast milk. No one touched it but her, my uncle, and the older kid. After that, it was a rule of thumb. If she made it, don't eat it. Mind you, after my grandma died in '07, we haven't had any family holiday get-togethers like that since, so no worry there. Story 20. Our neighbors are Pakistani/Indian, and we're friends and have dinner at each other's house a couple times a year, taking turns. My wife is half Italian, and she's an excellent cook. She makes amazing Italian food, but when they eat at our house, they hardly touch anything. Even a nice simple homemade spaghetti and marinara. And when we eat at their house, we can hardly handle their food either. Sometimes they take us out to their favorite local Indian restaurant, and we love the food there. And when they have a party and they have the food catered, we also really enjoy it a lot. But when we eat at their house, the homemade Pakistani/Indian food is almost impossible for my white boy stomach to handle. Story 21. I had a small circle of coworkers that I was friends with, and we would occasionally hang out together outside of work. One of those coworkers was Lisa, a mid to late 40s woman who was single, but had a couple of yappy dogs and several cats. Lisa invited several of us over to play board games and said she would cook us dinner. We got there while she was still cooking, and we were standing around the kitchen talking to her while she finished up cooking. We all about crap our pants when she took the spoon out of the pot of spaghetti sauce she was cooking, tasted it, and then casually held it down for her two little yappy dogs to lick the spoon, then stuck it right back in the pot of spaghetti and continued stirring it like it was the most normal thing in the world. I'm not sure how the rest of them got out of eating it, but just before we were supposed to sit down and eat, I faked an emergency call from work and said I had to run into the office and deal with a problem, and got the hell out of there. I was always busy every time she invited us over after that, and never ate anything she ever brought to an office potluck. Story 22. I graduated high school at 6 feet 10 inches tall, but weighing only 120 pounds. That's not skinny, that's emaciated. The food prepared by my bio mom was so bad that it wasn't providing me with the nutrients or calories I needed to survive. I went off to college where I had to cook for myself. I wasn't allowed to cook at home because my father insisted that, quote, cooking was women's work. Not only did I discover that food didn't have to be burnt to a crisp, flavorless, or boiled until everything was gray, I also discovered that food can be made to taste good, and using things like salt or pepper, spices, or various condiments can make it taste amazing. The freshman 15 likely saved my life. The thing is, I don't think that my bio mom was even aware that her food was that disgusting. Whenever we went out for dinner, which was more often than what my father wanted, but he was the only one that insisted on going, she did nothing but complain about how the food was undercooked, practically raw, or too spicy to eat. When she went to other people's houses, including her own extended family, she would criticize them for doing it wrong when she watched them cook anything. She would often end up refusing to eat their food because she watched them ruin it when they cooked it. We never had guests over to eat her cooking, ever. Story 23. When we were just starting out, my first wife and I were invited to a couple's house for dinner. Being polite, also not knowing any better, we accepted and sat down to a nice home-cooked spaghetti dinner. Now, every young couple we knew made a version of basic-ass white people pasta and sauce. Dry pasta, boil and drain, sauce from a bottle and meat, toss it all together. Maybe make a version of garlic bread if you're fancy. This did not occur. Wet-ass, poorly drained noodles, sauce and meat together until the meat basically boiled through, and sugar, heaps of it in the sauce. To top it off, yeast rolls, a family recipe that I would have sooner taken to a riot and used to smash windows with. Shockingly enough, rich-only kid and his head cheerleader wife did not, in fact, know how to cook. How polite were we? 2 duty stations later, we wound up at their Christmas dinner, and no, their culinary skills did not improve. Story 24. I was at a friend's house pretty late, and his mom asked if I wanted to stay for dinner. I ended up staying. I was told we were going to have spaghetti and meat. I know, I can hear what you're thinking. Surely you mean meatballs. My name's not Shirley, and that's what I thought. She told us to go play, and 15 minutes later she was calling us. I was naturally confused because I know spaghetti takes longer than that. We rush inside, and what I was served sure as hell was not spaghetti. Sitting in front of me was a plate of stone-cold, wet spaghetti noodles covered in ketchup with chunks of cold Spam. I ate like 2 bites and was full, but they happily gorged themselves on this insult to Italian cooking. But it did finally explain why my friend hated coming over to my house when my mom made real spaghetti. He thought that was fake spaghetti. First and last time I ever ate over there. My mom did not believe me until he visited again and confirmed it. As an adult, I asked him what in the hell that was, and he said it was real spaghetti, and that he eats it as an adult regularly and despises fake spaghetti, as he calls it. You might be thinking they were poor. They were not. Story 25. I had slept over at a friend's house when I was in middle school. It was really dirty and trashed and also had this bizarre, powerful funk I couldn't identify, but I didn't think much of it. At the time, I had a bad habit of getting up in the middle of the night for a midnight snack, so I went into the kitchen because they had the leftovers from dinner out, and a kid don't know any better. I hit the lights, and man, every plate, dish, item of silverware, etc. on the table was absolutely covered in cockroaches. They didn't even run when the lights came on because they knew they owned that house. I somehow managed to turn the light back off and retreat to the living room before emptying the contents of my stomach and curling up in a ball, imagining every stray, itch, or other sensation to be bugs crawling on me for the rest of the night. This is why I have a serious phobia of bugs. Story 26. Neighbor invited me and a couple friends over for pan-fried steaks with mushrooms. He answered the door wearing the same swimming trunks and torn, filthy t-shirt as the day before and barefoot. Those trunks with their netting inside really hold on to swamp ass and ball sweat stink, and it was obvious he hadn't showered or washed the clothes. No soap on the counter. No hand/bar soap or toilet paper in bathroom. Someone notified him about lack of TP or soap, and he said he just jumps in the shower after he poops. There's no soap in the shower either. I didn't eat. Everyone else spent the next 24 hours vomiting into trash buckets while they ejected from the other end on the toilet. Later, he confessed they were mushrooms he'd foraged himself. They all got lucky the idiot hadn't served them something deadly. No idea what they were. Was it food poisoning or a toxic mushroom? IDK, but you don't eat at people's houses unless you're certain of their food safety precautions. Some people are too stupid to be trusted around food. Story 27. My dad's house. I stayed with him once, and on the first day, he took some ground sausage out of the freezer to thaw for dinner. He put it on the stove in between the burners to thaw. He said the heat from cooking breakfast and lunch would make it thaw faster. He moved it to cold water in a bowl, but according to him, that was to appease me because I'm a germaphobe. He also has a habit of scratching his belly and back almost constantly, even dipping into the waistline of his shorts in the back to scratch, and never washes his hands. I asked him about it because I saw him doing it while he was making breakfast, and he said very defensively, "It's not like I'm scratching my ass crack, just my lower back." So yeah, that was day one, and I made myself scarce at meal times the whole time I was there. Story 28. Recently at my mother-in-law's, she asked for a jar of Alfredo sauce from her cabinet. Grabbed one. A year expired. Grabbed another. 2 years expired. The oldest I found expired in 2018. There was also a day recently where she wanted me to make taco meat out of ground beef. I opened the meat and it smelled rancid, like totally rotten. She smelled it. Oh, that's fine, just how ground beef smells. She tried to make me cook it and I refused. No wonder her autistic daughter accidentally crapped in the pool this summer if she's cooking expired foods just because she's cheap and doesn't want to replace something if it's bad. Had to tell my 9-year-old that I don't want him eating at Nana's house anymore. Story 29. Stayed at a college football teammate's house the night before we left for a spring break cruise. Everything seemed perfect at first. We got a free ride from campus to their house, 8-hour drive, and free tickets to a playoff hockey game. Their team won. They had 3 free beds for us in their bonus room, but lo and behold, they were covered in cat hair, yet we saw no cats, because it was late at night. After waking up red-eyed and itchy, we went downstairs for breakfast before heading out and noticed cats jumping on the kitchen counter. After surveying the house and screened-in pool outside, Florida, cats were everywhere. After the mother made us a breakfast quiche and shooed 4 cats off the kitchen counter, we asked, "So how many cats do you have?" "Oh, we have 27, but this one," points to one of the aforementioned cats that was on the kitchen counter, has HPV, so we try to keep it separate from others. Needless to say, I only drank bottled water that morning and vowed to book a hotel if for some reason we got stuck in our departure city again post-cruise docking. Story 30. Went to a barbecue held by a coworker of mine. When we got there, she lived in this really run-down, disgusting hygiene house, and I was glad we were sitting outside. She mentioned that she had marinated the chicken in the bathtub, which put me off eating anything not prepackaged. Then later I asked to use the bathroom and actually saw the bathtub. It was effing disgusting, streaked with black for some reason. I went back outside and subtly passed the word around not to eat the chicken. I think I might have saved a life or two that day. Absolutely, you're doing God's work, my friend. That's not a secret that you hold close to the vest. I mean, if other people were getting sussed out, which they probably should have, just knowing that the food was cooked in the bathtub, for you to go in there and see what that bathtub looks like and just absolutely confirm, like, no go, tell as many people as possible, shout it from the rooftops, love it, good for you. Story 31. I used to be a really sick kid and constantly in and out of the hospital, but no one could ever tell me exactly why I was always feeling so bad. But once I moved out of my mom's house, I never had tummy issues again and wouldn't get sick as often or feel horrible so frequently. Then, once I went to visit my mom and she had chicken in a Ziploc bag sitting outside on the steps, right where any number of animals could get to it. I was about to throw it away, but she stopped me and said that was for dinner. She was just throwing it in the sun. I've never eaten at my mom's house since, but it did make me realize that a lot of the things she'd do in the kitchen were just not okay at all, like leaving food out to thaw in the sink all day, bug-covered chocolate, mouse-eaten Kraft mac and cheese boxes, roaches in cereal, apple juice so old it started growing a large mass inside the bottle. Oh god, and the times she would cook pork and it would smell like burning piss. I thought that's what pork was supposed to smell like and assumed I just didn't like pork, but nope. It was very clearly expired. Story 32. When I was a kid, I used to visit my grandmother a lot. One day, she gave me crackers and cheese to snack on. I was about to take a bite of a cracker when I looked down and saw something moving on it. "Hey," I said, "there's bugs on this cracker." My grandmother took a look. "There's nothing there. Eat your crackers." But I insisted, so my aunt took a look. "There's nothing there. Eat your crackers." But I continued to insist until my other aunt took a look. Sure enough, she saw little brown bugs crawling all over the crackers. My aunt opened the box the crackers had come from. Bugs. She pulled boxes from the cupboards and looked inside. More bugs. The whole kitchen was infested with little brown bugs. They were in the cookie tins, in the bread box, in the flour. My aunt asked my grandmother, an avid baker, how she hadn't noticed the colony of bugs that had taken over the white flour. Her response? "Oh, I thought it was whole wheat." They ended up tossing out at least 3 garbage bags of food that night. The cupboards were bare when they were done. It seemed to take care of the problem, but I was always a little weary about eating at my grandmother's house after that. Story 33. My 3-year-old niece's birthday party. The kids, all around the same age, gather around the cake, which was a really nice one that was custom made by a bakery. One kid has a snotty nose, and he's really fascinated by the candles and trying to get up close so he can blow them out. He's blowing, and his mom keeps trying to pull him back so my niece can blow them out. I'm thinking, this is gross. He's blowing flu germs all over the cake. I ain't eating that. He breaks loose and gets right up next to the cake to blow, but this time he sneezes instead. A big blob of snot lands on top of the cake. I was laughing my ass off. Funniest thing I've ever seen. Then the adults were racing to pull him away from the cake, and they scraped off the icing and served the cake. I don't think anyone really ate it at that point. They just kind of scattered it around their plates so it might look that way. Story 34. So last year, my whole family was at our camp at the reservation for the weekend. We're out there cooking lots of food and chillin'. One of the pots was chicken and dumplings. My uncle had grilled a bunch of chicken and brought my aunt a bowl and said any chef would be awfully sad to see this go to waste. All I saw was some kind of yellow liquid in it, and she walked right over and dumped the bowl in the pot of already cooked noodles. Dinner time comes and we're plating everything. As I'm scooping food into bowls, I'm like, what the hell smells like dog crap? I'm looking all over. They tell me it's the feta in the salad. No way, it was 10 times worse than that. So we're in the screen house eating, and I go to take a bite of the noodles and immediately throw my head back. It smelled like literal poop. I'm looking at all the bowls of what would be chicken and dumps, and they're eaten and empty. I felt like I was the crazy one. I turned to my girlfriend and quietly whispered, "Did you not smell or taste the crap stench on these noodles?" She side-eyes me and says, "I didn't notice it until I was done." Oh man, I was freaked. So, to cut it short, my absolute moron of an uncle gave my aunt a bowl of chicken marinade to throw in the pot of cooked noodles. Marinade, not broth. I was stunned. So, to make this a we don't eat at other people's houses story, I then learned that they regularly put the bowl of marinade on the table and dip their chicken in it while they eat. Effing disgusting. So there's my story. Story 35. Mine is tame compared to the other stories here. When I was a kid, my friend's mom thought most food would, quote, cause autism. She also genuinely thought all sugar was bad for you, and fruit was forbidden in her house. For the record, she was also extremely fat-phobic. She was also a terrible cook, and took it as a personal offense when I asked for some ketchup once. Condiments were a big nope. They made food enjoyable, so therefore they were forbidden. This woman hated joy. Anyway, I had to spend the night at my friend's house once when my parents went on some trip. I was nervous about dinner because I'd heard the stories. We had roast. God knows what, to be honest. It was so dry I nearly choked. It was overcooked to the point of being like jerky. It had sharp edges and actually cut the inside of my mouth. We were only allowed to have water or milk with dinner, as juice would give us the autism and anything caffeinated was of the devil, according to friend's mom. After that dinner, I never ate there again. Long story short, my mom used to sneak real food to my friend through a wooden fence, and none of us caught autism from the canned fruit. Still up in the air if we're going to hell for drinking Pepsi. Story 36. I was invited to a girl's house in my hometown. She seemed to be interested in me, but already had 3 or more kids, and none of which were mine. So, okay, I go to visit her. She did ask me after all. Her mother tried to hook us up, but holy smokes. When I walked in her house, there was dirty old tissues over the floor, food remains on the floor, dried old Kraft dinner, some vomit on the wall next to the floor. Looks like she cleaned the floor but missed the wall. She must have been 5 dogs and 2 cats with 4 goats and 3 sheep. It was a little busy in her place to live along with 3+ kids. She did have some dog or cat poop on a newspaper. Must have been there for a while because there was no stink to it. At least I didn't smell any fresh poop. She offered me something to eat. But when she opened her kitchen fridge, I seen something black inside, and it wasn't drinkable. It looked black and blue spots as if it was something literally rotting in her fridge. I didn't bother to say anything. I just said I'd be right back, going outside for a smoke. I left and never returned to her place. I was accused of SAing her not too long after, but cops laughed it off. We don't talk at all anymore. I guess I dodged a bullet there. Story 37. Years ago, I was friends with a guy from work. Chill dude, really smart tech guy, super down to earth. He invited me to dinner over at his one night. Says his wife makes really amazing Italian food. I stopped off on the way to buy a bottle of wine and a nice cake for dessert because my parents always told me never to show up empty-handed. Well, the second he opened the door, I was hit with a wave of odor that I can best describe as a collection of urines, human and animal. The house had the look of a crap hole that was only recently cleaned for company, like everything had a slight film of filth over it. Piles of dust / dried cat crap in corners, etc. His wife was about 10 years older than him and kinda weirdly manic as she ran around cooking, yelling at the kids, a chunky teen who smelled like death and a demon 5-year-old, and then throwing me random one-liners of small talk. My coworker invited me down to the basement, which was surprisingly clean compared to the upstairs, but was also obviously his office / studio space, which had been taken over by a warehouse's worth of large plastic containers full of his wife's abandoned craft stuff. We went back upstairs and the teen was carrying the screaming child upstairs as she pissed all over herself and the floor. I got a text, then went out on the porch to return a call, and was driving home 5 minutes later because of the emergency. My coworker was transferred to another team a few months later, and several years ago, I heard through the grapevine that his wife left him for some Scottish guy she met through some kind of old soul conspiracy theory dating site. Story 38. Every holiday at my restaurant, the exec chef would make us family meal in the morning. Jimmy Dean breakfast sandwiches. I don't know if it was his sick joke or if they were effing old as crap, but we all worked doubles. Every server would be running to the bathroom every 15 minutes because we all had the craps. We all felt like crap all day. From the first Xmas day, we wouldn't touch any mother effing Jimmy Dean breakfast sandwiches, having to act all happy to a Xmas family saying, "Thank you so much for working," while you're trying not to crap your pants. Story 39. I was at a friend's cabin in the mountains getting ready for a walk, and I asked them if I could fill my water bottle, since they were going to fill theirs too. The water I had been using was from the cabin faucets, but they also stored some water in tanks from a nearby stream and put a bit of bleach in them to make that water safe, in case the water supply was cut. For some reason I still don't understand, my friend did not go to the faucet to fill out water bottles, nor the treated water tanks. They went directly to the stream. I was crapping and puking all the contents from my gastrointestinal tract some hours later. Someone told me afterwards that a cow had died upstream, and that might have been why I got poisoned by untreated stream water. No crap, Sherlock. Story 40. I had a friend who was always getting sick and seemed to have a lot of food sensitivities, although had no food allergies, including lactose and gluten issues. I went to her house one day, and upon walking in the kitchen, immediately knew the source of her vomiting, diarrhea, and digestion issues. She was constantly getting mild food poisoning. Why? The wet sponge on the kitchen sink had sat soggy in dish juice since the last time she washed dishes, which was weeks ago based on the pile of unscraped plates in the sink and on the counter. The dish soap they used was not antibacterial, and they did not have a dishwasher. Very little was being done to actually sanitize or thoroughly clean the dishes after they stewed in cumulative days or weeks worth of old food and water from using the sink. The sink smelled horrible. It literally rivaled a restaurant grease trap. The grout on the floor was black, not the original color. They spilled chicken juice from the container all over the countertop and floor and were going to leave it until I cleaned it up. I asked where their Clorox or bleach was, but they didn't think it would warrant that because it'll just dry. There were multiple open versions of things in the fridge, and they would combine 2 low containers into one without regard for either's expiration date. Spoons were left in containers because it's evidently just easier to scoop stuff that way. If you aren't aware, that's a really disgusting practice considering the amount of unwashed hands touching the spoon handle and then sticking it right back in the container. They have a rodent problem, yet would leave cereals and dry goods in the cardboard/paper containers. If I didn't know any better, I would think this is a ploy to cut down on cat food by simply maintaining a breeding population of mice in the kitchen. They once brought a crock pot of buffalo dip, which was melted cheese with shredded chicken, to a potluck. The shredded chicken was still pink, and not from the dye in the cheese. And the cheese was just cheddar plus cottage cheese without any stabilizers. So the cheese sauce got all grainy and gritty, and the oil separated out. I have a lot of respect for people with the skill and knowledge to make food from scratch. I'm not among them, but I have no respect for people who don't know how to cook, but also refuse to use recipes. She was also not the only one in the household, and they make enough money to live cleanly and safely. I love my friend, but I do not know how her family missed the memo on this. I'm not close enough to her to talk about these things. Story 41. Oh man, when I was 12, my grandma and I signed up for this volunteer opportunity at her local fabric store to make baby blankets for preemies. It was a lot of fun, and it felt cool making something to donate to hospitals. What didn't feel so good was my stomach after we left. One of the women in charge had a chronic bowel disease. Not sure what specifically, but she had made a cheese and meat platter for everyone to have. She must have gone to the bathroom and not washed her hands very well. At least that's what my doctor told me probably happened. I started getting severe stomach pains, and my mom took me to the ER. They thought it was appendicitis, so they sent me to the children's hospital. Turns out it was Shigella, an intestinal infection, and I spent 6 days in and out of consciousness at the hospital. Like, I couldn't even stand without violently throwing up. My dad got me a cool new flip phone though, and everyone showered me with cards, gifts, and flowers. Too bad I was too out of it to appreciate any of it, lol. To this day, I still cannot eat cold cuts at a gathering unless I know and trust everyone there. Story 42. I have a reverse version of this. Once my dad was hosting a Christmas party and invited the neighbors. It's just the 2 of us, so we typically just cycle through like 3 cups that we wash. We've always had a moth problem, but it had gotten really bad that summer. We were able to deal with it, but you'd occasionally find the dead moth here or there. Anyways, the neighbors brought home some eggnog, and I grabbed a cup for them. After they poured, I saw a dead moth floating in it. Horrified, I offered to get them a new cup. Filled it up, and would you believe it, but another dead moth was floating in it. They were giving some serious looks at that point. I thoroughly washed the second cup and used that again to ensure that there were no more dead moths. Anything I offered them from then on out, I carefully inspected prior to giving it to anyone. Story 43. I had a friend in college who lived nearby, so I would visit often after class on my way home. I was young and shy and ignored several red flags during this friendship. A huge one was her lack of hygiene and traits of a hoarder in the making. Shortly after becoming friends, I tagged along as she did groceries. She dropped huge amounts of money far outside a typical collegiate budget, so I thought maybe she was an impressive cook. But I would walk into her apartment and get hit by a wave of this horrible sour odor. She would forget to put food away, milk left overnight, chicken de-thawing for days, etc. Fruit flies everywhere, an overflowing trash bin, sticky countertops. Once I went to look for a glass of water or something safe, only to find all her clean dishes were greasy. I found out as she jokingly showed me how she cleans dishes. Mind you, we lived in a neighborhood where most people don't have dishwashers, so she would drizzle dish soap over the sink full of dirty dishes and swish some water over them and call it a day. She also had a tendency to eat in bed and fall asleep as her food crusted into her bed sheets, which she never cleaned. Eventually, she decided it would be a good idea to get a dog. Needless to say, that friendship didn't last very long. Look, you can still be friends with a disgusting slob, just don't go over to their house. Come on, everybody needs a friend. Story 44. My grandmother would forbid anyone from drinking anything until their plate was totally clean. If you didn't clean your plate, you weren't allowed anything to drink. She said liquid is only there to fill in the cracks after you've finished your food. The number of times as a little kid I would excuse myself to the bathroom so I could drink from the sink. She was a Greek immigrant who lived through the Depression and also never checked expiration dates. One time I ate a salad there with ranch dressing that was oddly green, and it turns out it had expired 7 years previously. Luckily, she had also made bread pudding from the leftover, blessed communion bread that she took from her church. I like to think that the blessed bread battled the demonic ranch dressing on the battlefield of my child's stomach. Story 45. My friend's family lived in a 30-foot trailer. 5 people. Grandma, dad, uncle, friend, and sister. Grandma sat next to the only entryway with chain-smoking cigarettes while playing solitaire with a quite old, all-in-one computer placed on an undersized TV dinner table. Like enough cigarettes that ashes were everywhere around her. An industrial-sized tub of Miracle Whip sat on the floor between garbage bags. There was no floor to be seen, just stuff on the floor everywhere. I spent a short stint staying with them as I had nowhere else to go for a few weeks. There was not enough beds to sleep everyone, so it was find a spot and get comfy. I tried my best to make an acceptable spot to sleep on the floor. One night I rolled over and found a plate of chicken bones covered with ants under my damn pillow. The whole place was so unclean, I wanted to gag just thinking that these people spent 95% of their time in this dumpster of a trailer. There was no possible way the food we had been eating was sanitary. Wonderful people, though. They would bend over backwards to help you, even though they had very little. And while I'm truly grateful for the help they gave me, it was a bit traumatizing. Story 46. I was working with a small group of developers, and we had a large project and non-flexible deadline. Like, this thing needs to be done a week before we present and launch, or it's game over for everyone. I was a team lead for our animation department, so the team wanted to crank out all pre-production in a day. Luckily, my team of 4 all lives together in a house, so all I had to do was drive to them, and we would get it done. The house looked nice and big from the outside, but once I went in, the stench of dirty litter boxes, yes, litter boxes, that were all on the kitchen table in the living room. Some of the litter clumps were on the table and had been there for a long time as there were spider webs under the table and on the chairs. Above the table was like a cloud of dust that just floated there and was all in the room and looked like it traveled up the stairs. The stairs looked like they put a carpet or rug, but it was layers of hair and cat puke, hairballs and shredded cat toys all mixed together. I tried not to breathe in there, but I shook everyone's hand and we moved into the kitchen and I saw a nice backyard. I made a beeline to the back door as one of the teammates was outside. It was not bad outside and very refreshing to breathe clean air. We were all outside and one of the guys said he was about to cook, but I suggested I go bring back pizza and we can take it from there, or we pile up everyone in my truck and head over there ourselves and get everything done there. I will tell this right now. There were colors on the faucets I did not know could grow on metal. They had black mold growing on stacks of plates. One of the guys was hoarding dirty dishes in his home office desk, which he kept next to the table full of litter boxes. How do I know this? He could find his wallet and emptied it out. I worked for that company for almost 2 years before I left for a different job, but I never went to their house again. I was nice, professional, and kept hand sanitizer and bleach wipes in my office every time I had to deal with them. And I burnt a candle to freshen up my space, too. Story 47. Probably gonna get buried, as it's mild in comparison to some here, but I'm a cottage baker. I keep a pretty clean house and have a dedicated workspace to prep everything. A new baker came on the scene a few months ago and everyone started going nuts about their stuff. I walked up to their tent one day to say hi and be friendly, and got a distinct waft of wet dog off of them, and their table was just kind of a mess. It didn't present well. I didn't say anything to anyone I know and went about my business. People were dropping money with them like crazy. A few weeks later, they post on socials and you can clearly see a dog in the background, while they're holding a customer item with their bare hands. I was done at that point. You do not have animals in the same space as food prep. This is gross. I warned my immediate friends and everyone noticed the photo too. Then another vendor found hair in their cake parfait thing. Told ya. Story 48. I have 2 examples, both when I was a kid sleeping over at a friend's house, just once apiece. One house, the girl's family had in their family for a couple hundred years, and it was a nice house, but absolutely filthy. Like, they had a dog and let it poop in the attic and never cleaned it up. They left food out and the fridge door open. Every surface was disgusting, from the animals and just dust and stuff. Then the girl threw up on my pillow, and I cried and wanted to call my mom, and the dad said, "It's fine, stop whining, just flip the pillow over." I refused and went against his wishes and used the phone to call my mom. The house was mostly tolerable, except mom spit on the walls, like chewing tobacco, just spit all over the bedroom. I think the walls used to be white. Something about spiting the landlord? I refused to go back to that house again, especially after they made me sleep in a chair. Story 49. I once got farmed out by the wife to help a guy from church fix his Jeep. He was one of those pretty boy kind of guys, dressed in golfing branded clothes and all that. Guy knew nothing about his Jeep, besides it wouldn't pass inspection because a hinge joint was floppy where it bolted onto the frame. With a welder and appropriate brass rod, I got back to where it needed to be. He offered me some lunch and I accepted and went inside. It was a pigsty. There was years upon years of dirt on the carpet, with candy wrappers and other lint/dirt/string/piles of muck all over it. Cigarette burns too. Clothes draped over the backs of all the furniture, some obviously dirty. Pile of laundry on the dining room table. His wife asked him to change his baby's diaper while she dished out pizza, which was delivered, but I never noticed a delivery guy. Onto paper plates. Dude took his baby and set him on that nasty floor, removed the diaper, left baby on floor to get a new one, put the new diaper on, didn't even dust its back so he's covered in gunk, and left the old diaper sitting on the floor wrapped up till I'd left. I get into the kitchen and there are dirty dishes everywhere. So many, I'm certain that there wasn't enough cabinetry to hold them all. When I ate the pizza, I realized it was cold, but it had came out of the pizza boxes on the counter, and it looked as if everyone had just gotten a piece. His wife had a friend by that apparently was there to help her keep things tidy, because it was so hard to. I agreed with her and said, I know how it is with a baby. I made sure to not touch any surface inside that place. When I got home, I told the wife I'm never going back there, as I showered. My great-grandmother lived alone in a soapbox house, with my aunt/uncle living beside her in a trailer. I would have happily gone there and ate anything she cooked, sat on her couch, slept in her bed. I would have never stayed any longer than I had to at that dude's house. I couldn't look at him the same again either. Story 50. I already have to be careful since I have a lot of health issues relating to food, but for homecoming I went with my friends to someone's partner's house for dinner before the dance. No one told me they were strict vegans that didn't believe in medicine or science. I didn't say anything. I was polite and just ate crackers until my friend pulled me aside away from all ears and asked if after getting out the house, I wanted her to buy me something I could actually eat since she was very understanding about my health. Her partner came over, heard, scolded her for suggesting it, and claimed my health problems weren't real. That friend's partner forced me to eat, making it known I wasn't eating to purposely get his partners upset, and I was forced to eat shrimp I could tell had expired. I got food poisoning, got sick in the middle of the dance, while another girl in our group did after no one but my friend that offered me to buy something believes me that the shrimp was expired. Story 51. When I was in high school, my friend invited me over to help her bake some cupcakes. She had just started a baking business and she had recently gotten a new order, so I was helping her out and I noticed she drank her milk directly from the carton after we made the cupcake batter. And I see there was only one carton in the fridge, so now I'm like, did she drink out of it before too? And then use that in the cupcakes? Then, as the cupcakes are baking, I see one of her cats. She has 2 cats and a dog. The dog was older and pretty chill, just liked to lay around all day. One cat you never really say she liked to hide, but the other was more noticeable. The noticeable cat was walking everywhere. It would come from her room and then jump on the counters, the fridge, the table, the furniture. I just started to feel bad for whoever bought those cupcakes because the cats are walking all over every surface in the kitchen, then using backwash milk for the cupcakes. Her mom came home not too long after and invited me to stay for dinner. Needless to say, I declined. Story 52. An ex-BF's house when I was about 18. I'm already super paranoid about eating. At that time, I hated eating in front of people. My dad is massively paranoid about food prep and had drummed the same into my sister and I, so I'm already anxious about the hygiene of other people's houses and kitchens, etc. Plus, I have IBS, so, every meal is a bit of a gamble. The house was already setting me off a bit because it was so untidy. They were playing MTG in the downstairs hallway because his bedroom had the washing machine in it and was covered in laundry. He asked if I wanted a sandwich. Not really, but I also still haven't learned how to say no. So we go into the kitchen via the living room. In the living room, there are 3 or 4 adults who live there. This is a 2-bed house and his mom wasn't there. So there are at least 5 adults living in this house, plus him and his sister. I get it, but it definitely explained the untidiness, etc. Also, 4 rabbits in the hutches in the middle of the living room, smelling exactly like you'd expect. So, the kitchen. Chopping boards, out in the open with leftover crumbs from whatever on them. Plates and cutlery all over the place in various stages of used and clean. 2 open jars of peanut butter and jam with knives sticking out of them. He says they don't bother putting them away because they get used so often. I learned how to say no to food quite fast. I'm sorry, but I'm kind of getting hung up on the washing machine being in someone's bedroom. Like, how do you even get water to that thing? Unless the bedroom was put in the laundry room? I don't know, I'm so confused. So many questions. Story 53. I worked in case management for a nonprofit agency assisting low-income families. One of my favorite clients was this lady in her 40s, lived in government housing, major survivor of street life, but was doing fairly well considering her background and history. One day I went to visit her and she was cooking and wanted to show me how she made stuffed chicken wings. I obliged. She put a huge bag of raw, thawed chicken wings directly into her sink to wash it. Not the argument here. But sloshed the wings around so much all around her sink. Inevitably, some of the wing would fall slightly into the drain before the drain insert. And I don't know about you, but thinking about how disgusting my own drain gets made me almost want to gag thinking about eating something that had partially fallen into that. Story 54. I was at my mother's house. I've been moved out for years by this time. For dinner one day, when she asked me to go upstairs and get the kitchen knife from her bedroom. I thought it was a strange place to be keeping a knife, but alas, I went upstairs to retrieve it. Upon going into her bedroom, I saw that she was insulating her walls with fiberglass bats and using this large serrated knife to cut the insulation. I grabbed the knife, which has fiberglass still in the serrated teeth, and brought it back down to her. My mother proceeds to wipe the knife off on her pants, getting most of the fiberglass off but not wiping or washing it at all, and then proceeds to use the knife to continue cooking dinner. Needless to say, I don't eat at home anymore. I don't actually go home ever anymore because she's nuts. Story 55. I have 2. Ex-girlfriend's dad had an awesome vegetable garden in his yard. We always had fresh greens when I went over, often having steamed broccoli with garlic. So this one time I'm eating my broccoli and see a weird green thing on my plate. It's a caterpillar of some kind. I inspect my broccoli and they're everywhere. I warn everyone and they're like, well, duh, they're always there. Gross. The first time I ever got food poisoning was at Thanksgiving at my aunt's house. She forgot to defrost the turkey, so she stuffed it and cooked it anyway. When she pulled it out, the inner part was raw. The stuffing had absorbed all the raw turkey juice. She didn't tell anyone until I had been up all night puking. Story 56. I feel like I had so many of these experiences growing up, lol. I had one friend who would, and still does, talk about, I made this dish for my family for supper. It was so good! Or she'd tell me she baked something and that I should come over and try some. I learned very early on to never eat anything she cooked. Not only was her house infested with roaches, but she would cook with dishes that I watched her shoo roaches off of. She wouldn't clean them or even wipe them off. She just didn't care. Dishonorable mentions. I grew up with a friend whose mom would lick utensils while cooking with them, and she also liked to touch the food a lot without washing her hands first. Also, I've been to so many people's houses where they let their animals eat after them and be all around the food while they cook. Don't get me wrong, my cat is my baby, but just like I wouldn't want somebody's human baby being all up in my food before I eat, I don't want anyone's fur baby touching my food either. So look, if you're just prepping a meal for yourself, if you're single, living alone in an apartment, something like that, and only you are going to be consuming what's being prepped, do whatever you want. You can wipe your ass and then stick it in the meat that you're mixing. You can let your dog lick your plate and then eat off of it. Like, do whatever you want. It's gross, but that's your business. But when you're prepping food for other people, you have to have consideration for the sanitary part of preparation. You can't just prep that food like you would if you were just making a meal for yourself. Because if you make them sick, then you're going to have a bigger problem on your hands. Story 57. Growing up, my parents didn't ever have dogs as pets. We had 2 cats that lived beyond the time I moved out. A couple of years ago, my parents decided to get a bulldog after my sister moved out. Feeling lonely without kids in the house anymore, I suppose. And she's been an amazing dog for my dad, who can't work due to his poor health. A few months ago, I went over to their house to drop off some birthday gifts for my mom, and they invited me to stay for breakfast. I accepted, ate my hash browns and eggs, and then watched my dad let his dog lick his plate clean. I know some people are cool with puppy kisses, whatever, but your dishes? I haven't had the heart to tell him why that's the reason I've declined to eat at their house. We eat out together or at my house once a week now, on clean dishes, as the good Lord intended. Story 58. There were 3 people close to me that I couldn't eat their food. First is my SO's father. Unfortunately, he's passed, so it's no longer an issue. He was a chemist with a degree from an Ivy League school, worked for a major pharma company for his whole life, yet he was of the opinion that it didn't exist if you couldn't see it. He always left food out far too long and used food that was way past expiration. My brother is the same way, except he's usually too drunk to care. He makes food without cleaning the surfaces, leaves things out for days. He makes really good homemade bread, except I keep finding things in the bread, like rubber bands, so I don't eat anything he makes anymore. Third was my aunt. Add in pet hair from her dog, but all the same issues as the others. Story 59. Went to my hometown this year and visited my grandparents. They had an evening barbecue, and I think they took some uncooked chicken wings from a bowl, put them on the grill, and back into the original bowl, which probably had some raw chicken juices left in it. Needless to say that I was sick for approximately 3 days, throwing up and in a massive stomach pain, until my brother told me that he saw them using the same bowl. My grandma started making fun of me, saying, "Last time I threw up, I was pregnant," as hinting that I might be so. Lo and behold, that night she was also sick. 3 of the family members were super sick for the next few days. The worst part is that I was supposed to go wedding dress shopping a couple of days later, and I didn't get to enjoy the experience, as I was unable to eat for 3 days. Story 60. I got invited to a baby shower potluck at my mom's job. Food was good and everything went well. At 4 a.m., I awakened to the worst stomachache I've ever had. It took me 2 seconds to figure out what was happening, but I didn't make it to the toilet and profusely vomited all over my carpeted room. This was the morning before my brother's graduation, and I couldn't miss it. I damn near passed out at the stadium and had to be wheeled into a handicap spot where I was promptly wheeled out as soon as my brother's name was called. It was one of the worst cases of food poisoning I've ever had. As it turns out, a lady left a pasta salad in her car all day and remembered it at the time of the baby shower and still decided to serve it. She sent one lady to the hospital and 7 others got food poisoning. Story 61. When I first met my husband, the poor man's family is aloof and hardly taught him anything, so anything he knows is either learned from his grandfather, which passed when he was about 12, or he had to teach himself. Anyway, went over to his place and he wanted to cook for me. Thank God it was steak. Not that it was really any better, but it was slightly safer. I'm watching him cook and he dumps the steak and juices on a plate to marinate. Okay, cool. Then, once they're done cooking, puts them back on said plate. Luckily, he put mine on top, not touching the raw meat juices. He also tried to do the same thing with raw chicken and pork, and has said he's been doing it for years. I told him he was extremely lucky to have never had food poisoning or parasites, but I've since educated him on the dangers of cross-contamination, and luckily he no longer does it. Story 62. As I read some of the comments, I'm reminded of my years growing up at my mother's home. If there is mold on the bread, she would just throw out the fuzzy slices. If the steak smells like it's ready to turn, then rinse with cold water and sort of scrub it with your hands. Moldy cheese got the green stuff cut off. Food in a can should still be good if it hasn't been opened. Pre-packaged meats like hot dogs, sausage, and luncheon meat got the same treatment. I don't remember getting sick much, or maybe I blocked it out of my memory. I can't count the number of times during school I would bite into a sandwich and taste bread mold. I can tell when meat has gone bad by smell and feel, and even if I can't smell it before cooking, I can tell while it's cooking. My mother is a terrible food hoarder. She just goes out to buy more rather than use what she has of the canned food. I rarely touch any lunch meat from her fridge. She just buys new and leaves the old in there for a while. I will forever be on my guard when I hear, "I just bought that the other day." So it's cool that you can tell by smell whether or not meat's gone bad, but let's be honest, you don't need to smell it. You can tell meat's bad just by looking at it. If it ain't the right color, or if there's something crawling on it or growing out of it, scrap it. Story 63. Having a party at work for someone's retirement. Boss gives me the "we'll miss you" speech, blah blah, let's have cake, and hands the dude retiring the knife. He makes a slice or two, then takes his finger, wipes the frosting off the knife, licks it, and can't understand why a bunch of people start shouting at him as he goes back to cut another slice. Same guy, a couple years earlier. It's time for the holiday party, and this dude decides he's going to help set up, so they ask him to put the ice out for people's drinks. As is often the case, the ice is frozen in one big chunk. Not to worry, this guy's got an idea. He disappears for a couple minutes and comes back with a rusty hammer. Before anyone notices or can stop him, the ice is all broken up. Lots of warm sodas that day. Story 64. My own dang family. They're effing wild, LMAO. After I had been moved out for a while, I went back to visit one day just after they'd had a steak dinner. They hadn't cleaned up the table yet, so I got to see exactly what they'd served the cooked steak in. It was the styrofoam platter the raw steaks were packaged in, and it was unwashed. Bloody meat juice puddle and absorbipad included. Yes, you're reading this correctly. My mom cooked an entire platter of steaks, slapped them right back into the platter it was packaged in, and served them that way. And my entire family ate that dinner, looking right at it, and never once occurred to them how gross and unsafe that was. My mom's reaction when I brought this up to her was to just laugh it off, like, "Oops, LOL, oh well, too late." But luckily, my family is genetically blessed with steel-lined stomachs. While growing up, I regularly watched my dad eat leftovers that were so many weeks old that they had entirely changed consistency, and no one got sick. Somehow. Story 65. My nan. She's absolutely terrified of waste, which is why we don't accept her cooking anymore after the horrors we found in her kitchen and home. Mom made a Victoria sponge cake, placed it on the table, and went to notify the rest of the family that dessert was ready. Mind you, we have pets, so we know not to leave any food out unattended. However, my nan was sat at the table with the cake, so Mum assumed she'd keep an eye on things briefly. Anyway, my mum suddenly hears my nan shouting at our big dog. Not a reason for suspicion. My dog is cheeky, and my nan has a flair for the dramatic. Anyway, a few minutes later, Mum returns to the table, looks at the cake, and immediately noticed the icing on the cake looks thinner than before. She also notices that there are fork marks all over the icing, like the back of a fork had been used to re-spread the icing. Mum immediately puts two and two together and asks my nan had the dog helped herself to the icing whilst she was gone. Immediately, my nan panics. and starts exclaiming no, and begging my mom to not throw the cake away because it was perfectly fine. Not wanting to shame her mother, Mom quietly went to all the family separately to inform them the dog had clearly been at the cake and not to touch it, and not to make a scene. I went and found my dog, sniffed her face, and yes, she reeked of icing and had some white remnants on her beard. Also, considering my nan used a fork to respread the icing and not the obvious choice of a knife, suggests heavily that instead of going to the cutlery drawer, she picked one of the used forks left from dinner. We've seen her pick up dirty cutlery before, merely wiping it with a hand towel and to go set our table with it. We literally have a drawer full of clean cutlery. I love my nan dearly, and I understand her fear, but we do have to keep a watchful eye when she's around. Story 66. We have an older relative who grew up extremely poor and I later learned did not believe in expiration dates or throwing food away. They also insisted on hosting Thanksgiving and would be heartbroken if people didn't go. My mom never wanted to go, but my stepdad insisted out of family obligation, so we would always end up going, but my mom would feed us a huge meal beforehand, and when we were there, she would insist on making our plates, / serving us, which I always thought was so weird, since I was plenty old enough to do that myself. Come to find out that the reasoning was that she would only serve us food that other people had brought, and that was not made by the host because they would often serve 20-plus-year-old frozen turkey, veggies, and sides, and though they might have been technically safe to use, they were frozen. It was almost guaranteed they were frozen far after their original expiration dates, and she didn't want to risk it or risk us being rude and making a comment if we knew why we were allowed to eat it. Bonus story. My dad's girlfriend is a maid and met this new client at a potluck. When she showed up to clean the first time, she found out the cat's litter box was kept on the kitchen counter, so the dogs couldn't get into it. She doesn't know if they brought a dish to the potluck, but needless to say, she doesn't trust communal food gatherings anymore. Story 67. I worked on a lot of short films in my late teens / early 20s that I didn't get paid for because I was trying to build my portfolio. The deal was that they provide lunch halfway through the 12-hour day. Seriously. On one set, we were filming for a few days in the director's mom's home where his younger sister still lived. We spent the entire first day cleaning up cat crap from the rooms we'd been shooting in, off the carpet. The smell was horrible. Halfway through filming the second day, the sister came into the room we were shooting in, a bedroom, and grabbed a glass jar full of light red liquid and unidentifiable food out of her closet and went back downstairs. An hour later, the director's mom and sister served us lunch. Pasta with her special sauce, and, to my horror, green beans out of the jar that the girl had just pulled from the closet in her bedroom. I went ahead and passed on the closet beans and instead got the special sauce pasta, which turned out to be ranch mixed with barbecue sauce. I brought my lunch the rest of the shoot, and before you ask, this was rural Tennessee. Story 68. I had friends back in elementary school who lived in my neighborhood. I would often go over to their house to jump on the trampoline with them, explore the nearby woods, etc. We never hung out inside, which I thought was weird, but never thought much of it. After hanging out with them for a few months, I dropped by one night and they invited me in for dinner. Their mom was cooking steak in the kitchen and it smelled great. I was excited because who doesn't love steak? To my dismay, I noticed massive colonies of roaches every time a cabinet was opened. I mean, to the point where they wouldn't even run away. There wasn't enough space for the bugs to go because of how many there were. When she got plates from the cabinet, she had to wash them off because they were coated in dead bugs. I mentioned to my friends that they had a serious bug problem, and I'm sorry that they have to live that way. They were completely unfazed, mentioned how it's okay because their dogs eat the bugs. I try not to judge others when they cannot help their situation, being kids and all. However, I never came back around during dinner time. Story 69. I went to visit my parents 3 states away for a few days after they moved close to my brother and his wife. On one of the days of my visit, my sister-in-law, who's not known for her cooking skills, or any skills except her skills at being very pushy and condescending, insisted everyone go to her house for dinner. I normally hate eating at people's houses because I have a lot of food sensitivities. I told her I'd take them all out to dinner, but she kept insisting and kept insisting. So we're at their home, and she made something I can't eat. I asked if there was anything else, and she makes me a burrito with leftover food she had found, and sticks a big blob of sour cream on top. Something tasted off, but I was raised to be polite and ate what I could. Later that night in the hotel room, I suddenly start projectile vomiting. It's actually coming out both ends. My sister-in-law kept calling and saying, "It's stomach flu, it's stomach flu." I finally got the strength to turn off my ringer and lay in bed for a few minutes before it started up again, and I'm screaming, "Call 911!" as I'm in the bathroom puking my guts out and making a huge mess of the hotel bathroom. It was 2 days of my trip completely wrecked, and I went home on the flight, doubled over in pain and exhausted from the sheer muscle pain of being that sick. A year or so later, my other sister claims that our sister-in-law had been murdering family pets and that she's also plotting to murder our parents. Totally unrelated, and my sister didn't know about the situation with food poisoning, as she and I weren't really talking at the time. And she's not mentally stable, so I don't know what to believe, and that was certainly a weird situation. So, the disgusting food, that is what it is, but plotting murder? Probably deserves an anonymous tip to the police, at the very least. That's not just something you'd look the other way on. Story 70. I was working at a very small business in an industrial park. Only 5 to 7 people work there at a time. The boss would offer me coffee every now and then. I never really liked coffee, so I always declined. Over time, I noticed he would clean the coffee pot in the bathroom sink. Makes sense because there's no sink in the break area. Eventually, he asked me to clean the bathrooms. I realized that same sponge resided on the edge of the sink right next to the toilet. A toilet which only the guys were using. Us ladies know better and use the other well-kept bathroom. Based on the state of the toilet, the wall, the floor, and everything around it, these guys were getting piss and crap everywhere. He was essentially cleaning his coffee pot with piss and crap, and then complained sometimes that his store-brand coffee tasted like crap. Yeah, boss, I don't think it's the store brand. As a bonus, that sponge was there when I started and didn't get replaced the entire year I was there. Years later now, he might still be using the same sponge, thinking, man, this coffee is getting crappier and crappier. Story 71. Last Thanksgiving, my in-laws could not find their meat thermometer. Went only off the time they usually cook a turkey for. I told them that we had one. They said it didn't work. Found out later that they didn't take the plastic cap off and actually stick the turkey with it. When they said that the turkey was ready, they had no thermometer to check how well done it was, but I could just tell from the sight of it that it was undercooked. Hell, when they went to cut it, all the liquid from the turkey came out a dark/light pink with each slice. They then plated it. Each plate had pink liquid on it, and I almost threw up in my mouth. I told my wife, she said, "They said they cooked it all the way." And when she looked at it, she told her mom that it didn't look fully cooked. Her mom was irritated and said that she knew how to cook a turkey. I didn't eat anything they cooked. Only the sides that my wife and I made and my sister-in-law. When they had leftovers, nobody ate it except them. They did not get sick, but Jesus Christ, the thing was so undercooked, it wasn't even the texture of cooked turkey. This year, we're visiting family out of state to avoid any cooking debacles. Story 72. I worked with this lady that smelled like if you left your clothes in the washer, wet for several weeks, and then dried it in a filthy trash can. She has multiple conversations with our management about hygiene and still does not care. Sometimes when you walk down the aisle she sits on, you can smell it from multiple desks away. She's also super whiny too. This is point 1. Point 2. Anyway, we had a work function. It may have been Thanksgiving or Christmas and she wanted to bring something. We were all totally against it, but didn't want to be rude to her and make her feel left out. She said she was going to make banana pudding. Okay, cool. She proceeds to bring all the crap to make banana pudding, but at the freaking office. She makes the entire pudding thing in her cubicle. I walked down to ask her if she was getting ready to bring her stuff down, and as I rounded the corner, I saw her sticking her hand in the box of Nilla wafers, crushing them with her bare, unwashed hands, and licking her Nilla-covered hands, putting the crushed ones on the pudding, and then putting her hands back in the box, and repeat. I was so disgusted that I just turned around before she noticed me and gagged. Still gagging. Story 73. My ex-in-laws didn't do their dishes. Ever. They would let their dirty dishes soak in hot water until it was time to cook the next meal. After dinner, they would sit overnight, and then in the morning, they rinsed them off. No soap at all. None. Why? Because they thought it was a waste of money. And if that wasn't bad enough, they let their dog eat off the plates and drink from their glasses because they wouldn't buy it in a normal water bowl. They were so effing cheap, they had 2 towels for a household of 6 people, did laundry once a month, and vacuumed once a month, if even that. Half the time, they didn't even have toilet paper and just had a stack of old newspapers in the bathroom. They weren't broke. They just preferred to spend their money on alcohol, cigarettes, brand-name groceries, and clothes, which they tossed out after they wore them a few times. The amount of clothes I saw my ex-sister-in-law throw out was effing disgusting. Story 74. My SIL made Reese's balls for a Thanksgiving dessert. just balls of peanut butter coated in chocolate. She never cooks, so I thought I'd be nice and eat them and tell her how good they were. They weren't. They were awful. 2 hours later, I'm dying of stomach cramps in the car, and I had to beg my wife to pull over so I could throw up in the woods. How did I get food poisoning from chocolate and peanut butter? The mind boggles. Flash forward a few months when we fly out to their home for the first time and discover a biohazard of old fast food wrappers, dirty dishes, half-eaten food all over the apartment, literal goop on the counters, and unwashed kitchen towels. They have a toddler, and we spent the next several hours cleaning the apartment for the safety of the child. No, that actually is a really good question. How the hell do you get sick off of chocolate and peanut butter? Nothing else. There had to have been something else in there. Because even like expired chocolate presumably would not make you that sick. Story 75. I want to add to this, but it's about my own apartment. Don't live there anymore. I had 2 roommates I used to get along with great. The place was a bit messy most of the time, but I cleaned enough to keep up. Then my roommate totaled my car. Not an expensive one, but he couldn't pay me for it, so we agreed he would do all the dishes. But he would do them once or twice a month, and I was doing them most of the time to keep the smell down. We got roaches around this time because of their family coming over, who all live in roach-infested houses. It took me months to get rid of them. Eventually, I stopped doing the dishes because it was his job, and he stopped doing them because I wasn't helping anymore. The kitchen was so disgusting because of them that I stopped eating in my own home. I was exclusively eating fast food. After exactly 1 month of him not doing dishes, and the place smelling like a rotting corpse, I had enough of living like that. I bought plastic cups and silverware, paper plates, and bowls. Came home from class while they were at work and threw away every single dish I could find. They all belonged to me. I figured you can't have a sink full of dishes if you don't have dishes. They started leaving the disposable dishes in the sink, and it never got better. I moved out over a month early to get away from them. As a bonus, I went back the day before my lease ended to do some final cleaning so I wouldn't be charged too much. Then found out they let their sister stay in my room, and she left my toilet full of crap, so I had to clean that up. Story 76. My MIL has 2 indoor cats at the moment, and has about 3 outdoor cats. They occasionally come in. I can't go over there anymore because I'm allergic and she has too many cats for my allergies to handle. 1 might be okay, but I would still react. Just not as bad as I do now with how many cats she has. I used to eat her cooking, but for the past about 5 Christmas holidays, she would make a nut roll and cookies. Every single time, I would find multiple cat hairs in it. She's made a few other cakes and brought them over, and the one time in particular, I was hanging out in my living room with my husband and my MIL watching TV. We had the lights out, but the TV was illuminating the room enough that when I had my fork full of cake up, I could clearly see a huge chunk of cat hair poking out of my cake. I put my fork down and just placed the plate on my table and said I was full and I would finish it later. Definitely didn't finish it and threw it away when she left. Every time she makes something, I can see the cat hair poking out. She gave my husband something a few weeks ago. It might have been beef jerky or something like that. And there were literally cat hairs on and inside the baggie. I haven't been able to eat anything from her house since. And literally, he brought me home a can of seltzer water a few weeks ago. In my mind, I knew I should have rinsed it, but I didn't. First sip after I crack it open, I pull a damn cat hair out of my mouth. So now if my husband brings something from her house, I don't try it at all. Thankfully, it's only cat hair. Some of these comments are gnarly. I can handle a few cat/dog hairs every now and then. Human hair is a no-go for me. I instantly gag and can't even look at my food, lol. But I cannot say it enough that it was literally every single piece of food that I picked up that came from her house that had multiple cat hairs poking out. The one year I took the bag of cookies she made when I pointed it out to my husband, I broke 5 of the cookies in half after having found cat hair in the pastry she made, and I stopped eating it, and all 5 cookies had cat hair in it. Story 77. I would like to think I'm not too picky of an eater as far as taste is concerned, but there are definitely certain food appearances/textures that I cringe at, especially in certain combinations. Anyway, back in college, a friend wanted to come over and make dinner for me and a roommate since we lived in an apartment, while she still lived in the dorms and didn't have a kitchen. Before I left for the library, my roommate asked me if I had any allergies or other dietary restrictions, and I said no. I just said I didn't really like scrambled eggs or tomatoes as like the focal point of a dish. Anyway, when I got home later that day, there was a weird smell when I opened the door. Apparently, their attempt at making dinner went awry, and they burned/overcooked every other dish except one. This scrambled egg and tomato dish they decided to make with what ingredients were left over in the fridge. Trying not to be ungrateful, I tried eating it, but clearly I was grimacing because the scrambled eggs were somehow still a little runny, and the tomatoes were just mush. After multiple pain bites, they finally showed me some mercy and told me we could just go get some takeout instead. My roommate somehow made it through the whole bowl. After that, I never did quite trust whenever either of them wanted to cook something for the group. Story 78. When staying with my cousins, every other night was fight night. It was just a matter of when in the meal it happened. Followed the same formula. Pissy remark from my plastered drunk uncle. Pissy response from his slightly less drunk wife. Random amount of time of complete silence. Plate being hurled across the room to shatter into a million pieces while the three of us kids tried not to move or make a noise because if we did, we'd get hit/thrown/beaten along with his wife. 3 to 30 minutes of active knockdown octagon fighting. 30 to 60 minutes of separation while recovering. 2 to 5 hours of screaming at each other. Repeat every few days for 12 plus years that I was aware of. Cousin ended himself, and his 3 sisters, born after I stopped being there, ended up being effed up for life. Story 79. Not exactly horror as I saw here, but someone I used to be friends with. Her house just looked like it wasn't cleaned. It wasn't like untidy, it just had thick layers of dust and cat hair. The toilets were also brown stained at the bottom. But the kitchen? The table was used mainly by her cats. One of them used to go up the counter. She had this wood boards from IKEA and the cat would sit on it. Also was the same board she used to cook. Once she was cooking for us and the shroom fell into it, instead of washing it, she simply put it inside the pot. I'm used to cats, but mine don't go on top of counters, and I use plastic boards that are cleaned on every use. If something falls on the counter, it's trash to me, so I really didn't know how much she cleaned her kitchen, considering her house. And oh, the dining table was also a mess. Bless her heart, but I just felt sad about it. Story 80. I have a great uncle with some pretty eclectic food tastes. He's arguably a foodie, will eat anything and probably love it, but he also has very odd tastes and will make stuff that's just very odd. Also, he's slower than molasses in the kitchen, so if you come for dinner, eat first, and expect it at about 8 to 9 p.m. Not because he eats late, but because he started at 4 p.m., but that still wasn't long enough, and it's barely done by then. The lasagna that was gray. I think there was lamb in it. The whole thing was uniformly gray, soggy, and there was a ton of liquid in the pan when you removed a slice. I don't remember the food itself, but that time neither he nor another eccentric friend of his remembered to turn on the oven. So the meat/roast/whatever it was sitting in there for 2 hours, no heat. It was already 8 p.m. by this point. They were legit going to just turn on the oven and start from there. My parents convinced them to just go out to eat instead. The super runny scrambled eggs. We're still not sure why they were so runny. It wasn't just an undercooked thing. He discovered wild fennel growing near his house once, so for a long time, every single dish he made had a crap ton of fennel in it. I despise fennel in small quantities, but this was over the top even for fennel lovers. Basically, his food theory is if one spice is good, all of them together at once are better. Plus, far more than the original recipe calls for. Like double, and double on all of them even if the recipe doesn't call for it. Edit. How could I forget? My grandpa, he went through a salsa phase, added salsa to everything, literally everything. Went through a baking phase, added nuts to everything, except he didn't believe in rough chopping. It was chopped so fine, it was basically nut meal. Washed macaroni from macaroni salad and used the noodles in a new soup. Never used part of an onion, so if a recipe called for an onion, it was the whole onion. Every single time. The piece de resistance was the brownies on a, thankfully washed, styrofoam meat tray, like hamburger or steaks on it, wrapped in plastic at the grocery store. Yeah, wash that off and it's a perfect size for a brownie platter apparently. That's still a family joke, honestly. He's in a place now and doesn't cook anymore, thank God. We knew never to eat his stuff, but we were afraid he was going to get food poisoning one day, and being in his 80s, that could be a very big deal. Story 81. I'll never forget getting invited to my friend's brother's house for July 4th and being greeted to the largest stack of dirty dishes I've ever seen on a kitchen countertop. Like any hire, and Berkshire Hathaway would probably try to sell it as commercial real estate. Me and a guest were actually cleaning up for them because the place was just deplorable, and the hosts were doing nothing about it. Some of the food scraps on them were so old, bugs were forming or either dead on them. Then, after cleaning the monstrous stack of dishes, I go to sit on the couch, and it's absolutely effing caked with dog drool. They had a pit bull, and he drooled a lot. I mean, you could put your hand down on the couch, lift it up, and then a strand of God knows how old dog saliva would follow before it separated from your flesh. Then he opens the grill to, I crap you not, the most disgusting amount of grime on a grill I've ever seen, topped off with 2 burnt to a crisp rat corpses by the burners. That told me everything I needed to know. I excused myself for food poisoning and rang in America birthday with some McDonald's, something I never thought would be a monumental sanitary improvement to a barbecue. Story 82. I feel like this is minor compared to what I've read, but I was in college and walked into the kitchen while one of my roommate's girlfriends was making them dinner. She was doing tenderloin or something similar that gets fried in oil. Most people will get a little drop of water on their finger and let it drip into the skillet. If it sizzles, the oil is hot enough. Not Peggy, though. Just as I rounded the corner into the kitchen, I see her leaning over the skillet, letting a line of spit fall from her lips into the oil. The other story was told to me, but it's hilarious. I knew these 2 brothers who had a friend they said was extremely hairy, and not much of a housekeeper. Vacuuming was done on rare occasions at this dude's house. Someone they knew was having a birthday, so they got a cake and balloons to celebrate at the friend's house. There were a few people working on the decorations, so they were just blowing up balloons, dropping them, and blowing up more balloons until they were done, at which time they hung them all up. When it came time to cut the cake, they realized their mistake. The static electricity from the balloons made hairs on the floor stick to them. As the balloons were hung, the hair started dropping from them. The cake was covered in body hair / pubes. Story 83. Junior year of high school. Me and my best friend at the time had been invited by a guy that was a year older than us to his grandma's house. They were friends for years, so I kinda knew him. He lived about 10 minutes from the school, so he said, meet me there after school. Me and my best friend walked there, and when we first got inside, we were hit by the smell of poop. Dog and cat poop combined. Also, smell of trash. It smelled so insanely bad. Also, I need to mention that this looked like one of those houses off the show Hoarders. It was just something I've never seen before. Anyway, he walks out from a room and tells us to sit at the table, which is also covered in crap. He casually slides it over and asks us if we want grilled cheese sandwiches. We agree to it, and 3 minutes in, he says, oops, gotta go to the bathroom, BRB. While he's in the bathroom, a giant-ass cockroach scurries across the table. Me and my best friend scream at the top of our lungs. We hear the toilet flush and the friend comes out. He didn't wash his frickin' hands. He asked us why we screamed, and we told him. He shrugged his shoulders and goes, oh yeah, should have mentioned that. We also have mice we're trying to get rid of. Ugh. He made our sandwiches with his disgusting, unwashed hands, and instead of eating them, we just held off. We asked him for some drinks, and while he went to get them, we threw out the sandwiches into the nasty trash and put it at the bottom. We left quickly and ended up getting pizza at the restaurant nearby. TLDR, me and best friend went to Grandma's hoarder house where a giant cockroach scurried across the table. He made grilled cheese sandwiches without washing his hands. Story 84. Not me, but my family. Almost 10 years ago, it was one of the first times I brought my lady to have dinner at my parents' house, and my mom was making steaks. We sat down to eat, and she served us the steaks and let us know to be careful because she broke a knife while cooking the steaks and isn't sure if she found all the pieces. Just be careful, she says. This, of course, is alarming to me as I don't want my lady, or anyone really, to bite down on a fragment of a knife blade and us spend the rest of the night in the ER. I immediately cut up my steak into tiny pieces and it seems fine. I then ask my lady if she'll switch. I hand her the cut up, safe steak and I take hers. I cut right into the middle and my knife hits a sharp, jagged chunk of knife blade about the size of a quarter. We finished dinner and everything was fine, but it took me years to convince my lady my mom wasn't trying to murder her. Now we're married and have a kid and do a steak night only at our house or a restaurant. Story 85. I was going with a friend over to another friend and we were all 20 at the time and in college, so living with our parents. I was pretty hungry and wanted to pick something out to eat before arriving, but my friend said his mother cooked something that morning and she would love to have us over for the meal, so I decided to go and eat there. His mother is a lovely lady, but I can't see her now without thinking about that day. We get there and she welcomes us to the kitchen table where she set plates for us. She cooked some curry rice with chicken, and I immediately regretted my decision when I saw the abomination on the plate. The rice had a consistency of risotto rice, combined with one of Thai rice, both undercooked and overcooked at the same time. It had no seasoning apart for some insufficient curry, but the chicken was the worst. It was completely unseasoned, wasn't fried or anything before, just boiled together with the rice from the start and, just as the rice, both undercooked and overcooked at the same time. I looked my other friend in the eyes and we both wanted to say we weren't hungry, but his mother knew it would have been a lie and she stayed with us while we ate, and I didn't want to upset her as she was super pumped up about us eating over. So we had to eat the whole effing plate out of respect and had to contain myself not to barf. The cherry on top was that his cat was staying on the table right next to the plates and wasn't even looking at all that chicken next to her, and she was a cat that would eat everything you would give her. This was a tough day. I also saw another one of his mother's concoctions in a different occasion when I was looking through his fridge and saw a pot with something that should have been soup in there, but looked like some kind of horror movie swamp with some poor chicken thighs sticking out. I was sorry for that chicken and wouldn't have even fed that to animals. After this one, I learnt my lesson and never looked in his fridge or take him up on the offer of eating over. So, when you're a child, it's a little bit different. Someone serves you a meal, you kind of are obligated to eat it. But when you're a grown adult, there is screw respect. There's absolutely nothing binding about eating someone else's food. You don't have to be a jerk about it and say, yo, that looks and tastes like dog crap. But, this whole out of respect, I ate the meal anyway. No, don't do that. Don't do that. If you know that you're about to eat raw chicken, I don't care if it's someone that you've got the biggest crush on and it's your first date and they're cooking for you and you just want to impress them. No, don't do that to yourself. Come on, people. Story 86. 2 scenarios for me. First one was when I was a kid. We lived in a cockroach-infested home. Not just one here or there. When you turned a light on or opened a cabinet, they scattered in hordes. Well, my stepmom was cooking pasta one night, and all of a sudden, as she's stirring, I see something fall from the ceiling and plop into the pot. Yeah, a roach. She scooped it out, threw it in the sink, and said, "You're fine, you're not gonna die." She was abusive, so I had to force my mind to not think about it as I ate, or else she'd be very upset that I didn't want to eat her home-cooked meal. I can still remember gagging with my mouth closed. Sadly, my own mom is the second one. A few years ago, it was Christmas time, and she decided she wanted to cook banana bread and some other baked goods for people. When I walked in the kitchen, she was beginning to prepare everything and didn't clean the kitchen. I'm talking dirty dishes, dog hair everywhere, and piss and crap all over the floor. I told her there's no way she's serious, and she was confused. I told her she can't be cooking for others with towels soaked in piss and crap smears on the floor because it's disgusting. She became defensive as hell and tried to explain why it's not a big deal because, quote, "I'm not cooking on the floor." I couldn't convince her why it was unsanitary. She always calls me a germaphobe and thinks I'm being dramatic. I felt so bad for whomever got treats. Story 87. My childhood friend's house. Was just her and her mom, lots of pets, hamsters, guinea pigs, chinchilla, and a really old cat that was older than my friend herself. All of their animals were allowed to free roam their house, including the rodents. No cages, just walking around and crapping everywhere. That cat would drool a lot and smelled of cheese. Her mom would make us tuna sandwiches. When she opened the can, she would let the cat have some first, drooling into and licking the tuna. It would drool all over the food, plates, countertops. Bread was covered in cat hair, rodent poop, and fur. I never ate anything from there because my mom refused it and I was grossed out. The whole house was disgusting, covered in animal fur/poop and dust. I don't think she ever cleaned. In the years I knew her, there were things on the tables that never moved once and had their own ecosystem. It's making me itchy just thinking about it. Story 88. After seeing how my boyfriend's younger siblings do the dishes, I'm very hesitant to eat at my MIL's place. They're a big family, so most of the time everyone is in charge of washing their own dishes after eating. Other times, 1 or 2 are in charge of doing all the dishes. But of course, everyone wants to go back to what they were doing as fast as possible, so they do the dishes in a hurry, with cold water, barely any soap, and either a dirty rag or just their hands. Then they dry it off with a damp towel that's been hanging there for days, and everyone has already used it for whatever. I also don't really want to let them help me with the dishes when they're at our place. Same goes for his dad. He always wants to help, but there have been times I found literal dirty dishes in my cupboards after he did the dishes. Also, he once did the dishes with a dirty sponge he found somewhere. It was a sponge we used to clean off literal bird poop from our pet bird. I have no idea why he decided to use that sponge. It wasn't even close to the sink. There was a perfectly fine Scrub Mommy sponge by the sink. So I had to find out what he washed with this sponge and redo it all. I ended up rewashing almost everything in my cupboards, just in case. He also doesn't give a F about expiry dates. Luckily, we never eat at his place. Story 90. One of my friends in college would always come in with something she'd made. We'll call her Jane. Jane usually would bring chicken salad. She'd always offer, but for one reason or another, none of us in our group tried it. One day, my other friends and I decided we'd go to Jane's after school because we had a project due and she had a laptop that she was going to let us use. When we walked into her house, an instant wave of dog poo and pee hit our nose. It was everywhere, including her daughter's room. Her husband had insisted on having 2 big, untrained dogs in the house. They were allowed to go wherever they wanted except his room. Anyway, we make it to the kitchen. My friend and I just silently looked at each other. We're both mentally agreeing we'll leave as soon as we're done with our project. It was due the next day. All we had to do was type it and send it to our professor. We figured we could tough it out. We start, and she begins to get things ready for some chicken salad she was making for the potluck the next day. She happened to lift her blender, and I kid you not, a swarm of roaches popped right out of the base. Jane didn't even flinch at this. She just continued on. We left not too long after that, and the next day we didn't even dare try her chicken salad or any food she'd made. Story 91. Oh boy, I have a good one. Was visiting distant family members in France and staying with them. For starters, they left a pot of soup on the counter for 3 days and then warmed it up and ate it. They let their cat walk all over their countertops, and at one point, it sat on a baguette that was out in the open, and they shrugged it off. And the piece de resistance was on Christmas, when they had raw oysters that had sat out all day long, and honestly, I thought someone had said they hadn't refrigerated them at all, because they were fresh and it was cold outside. And then anyone who ate them got really, really sick, which was like 5 people. Imagine 5 people running to the only bathroom in the house. I lost a ton of weight on that trip, and everyone thought it was because of the everyone loses weight when they visit France thing. Nope. I just literally did not eat 70% of the time. I begged to go to restaurants every day to actually eat something, but some days I just went hungry. I started buying cookies at shops and saving them for nighttime after dinner where I would fake a stomach ache. Story 92. Damn, no Rapper's Delight fans? Have you ever went over to a friend's house to eat and the food just ain't no good? The macaroni soggy, the peas are mushed, and the chicken tastes like wood. So you try to play it off like you think you can by saying that you're full, and then your friend says, "Mama, he's just being polite. He ain't finished." That's bull. So your heart starts pumping and you think of a lie and you say you already ate. And your friend says, "Man, there's plenty of food." So you pile some more on your plate. While your stinky food's steaming, your mind starts dreaming of the moment that it's time to leave. And then you look at your plate and your chicken's slowly rotten into something that looks like cheese. Oh, so you say, "That's it. I gotta leave this place. I don't care what these people think. I'm just sitting here making myself nauseous with this ugly food that stinks." So you bust out the door while it's still closed, still sick from the food you ate, and then you run to the store for quick relief from a bottle of Calpitate. And then you call your friend 2 weeks later to see how he's been, and he says, "I understand about the food, baby Bubba, but we're still friends." That was terrible. F- writing and rhyming, that sucked so hard. Or maybe I just don't have a future in the rap industry. I don't know. Go ahead and roast me in the comments, or roast the writing of that. That sucked. We're done here. Mic drop. I'm out.